I went back into the restaurant because I forgot my phone. That single, ordinary mistake saved my life. The dinner had already drained me. My head felt light, my body hollow, and even after stepping outside for air, the ground still seemed to sway beneath my feet. I told myself it was exhaustion. 64 years of work, stress, and responsibility eventually catch up with anyone. That was what my son kept telling me. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. For more than 3 decades, I built a luxury fragrance house with my own hands. I trained my nose the way an athlete trains muscle: discipline, precision, patience. I trusted my instincts, my craft, and my family, especially my son. That night was supposed to be a celebration, a quiet family dinner, nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. But when I pushed the door open and stepped back inside the restaurant, something felt wrong immediately. The noise was gone. No clinking glasses, no soft music, no polite hum of conversation. The dining room was nearly empty, the lights dimmed, chairs already stacked near the walls. It was closing time. I had barely taken 3 steps when a young waitress rushed toward me. Her face was pale, almost gray. Her hands were shaking. She grabbed my sleeve before I could say a word. "Please," she whispered, "you need to come with me, right now." I tried to pull back. I told her I had only come for my phone. I told her I was tired and wanted to go home. She did not answer. Instead, she reached behind her and locked the front door. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed far too loudly in the empty room. My heart began to pound. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a breath. "I know this sounds strange," she said, "but I need to show you something. From the security camera, above your table." Then she looked straight into my eyes, fear and urgency mixed together, and said something that made my knees weaken. "You have to promise me you will not faint." In that moment, I understood this was no longer about a forgotten phone. It was about something that happened while I was sitting at that table. Something my own son did when he thought I was gone. Before that night, I believed I knew exactly who I was. I was not a fragile woman losing her grip on reality. I was not confused. I was not fading. I was Eleanor Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Atelier, a fragrance house built from nothing but discipline and stubborn belief. I did not inherit wealth. I did not marry into power. I started in a rented workspace with cracked windows, secondhand glassware, and formulas written by hand in stained notebooks. While other people slept, I distilled. While others celebrated holidays, I tested batches that failed again and again. My sense of smell was not a hobby, it was my livelihood. It was how I paid my staff, how I fed my child, how I survived. To me, scent was memory. Jasmine was summer evenings, vetiver was wet soil after rain. Cedar was safety. I could smell fear in a room. I could smell dishonesty on a person long before they spoke. And for years, that gift never failed me. I raised my son alone after his father passed. Jason grew up in my lab, playing under worktables, learning the difference between orange blossom and narrowly before he could properly write his name. I believed exposure alone would give him respect for the craft. I was wrong. As he grew older, Jason lost interest in creation. He liked meetings, titles, applause. He liked the image of success far more than the work behind it. Still, I trusted him. He was my son. Blood mattered to me then. When the symptoms started, I blamed myself. First, it was fatigue, then congestion, then moments of dizziness. I dismissed them. Stress does strange things to the body. Everyone told me so. Jason told me so. When I failed to recognize a familiar blend in the lab, panic crept in. When coffee smelled like nothing, shame followed. When my own perfume felt empty on my wrist, fear finally arrived. I began to wonder if my time was over. That was when Jason stepped in more firmly. His concern grew louder, his suggestions more persistent. He spoke softly, patiently, the way people speak to someone they believe is already slipping away. And slowly, dangerously, I began to believe him. I did not know then that what felt like decline was not nature. It was design. From the outside, Jason looked like the perfect son. He called every morning, he checked my calendar, he reminded me to eat, to rest, to cancel late nights in the lab. His voice was always calm, always measured, always reasonable. Anyone watching us would have thought I was lucky. Even I thought so. Melissa, his wife, played her role just as well. She never raised her voice. never rushed me. She chose her words carefully, wrapping every suggestion in concern. She would touch my arm lightly when she spoke, as if grounding me. They never said you are weak. They said you deserve peace. They never said you are failing. They said you have already given enough. At dinner, Jason would lean forward and lower his voice, as if sharing a secret meant only for us. Mom, you do not need to prove anything anymore. You built something incredible. Let us help you protect it. Protect it. That word stayed with me. Melissa would follow, nodding slowly. Stress accelerates aging, Eleanor. You have nothing left to fight. Why carry the burden alone when family is here? Family. They spoke about the power of attorney the way one talks about insurance or medication. Something practical, something responsible, a safeguard. You can revoke it any time, Jason said. It is only in case something happens. Nothing happens without intent. They spoke of coastal air, quiet mornings, long walks, a smaller home, fewer decisions. They framed it as mercy, not removal. I felt myself shrinking. Not because they pushed, but because they waited. They let doubt do the work. They let my fear grow in the silence between sentences. When I hesitated, they did not argue. They smiled. They told me to sleep on it. And I did. At night, alone, I replayed every mistake I had ever made. Every batch that failed. Every time my nose betrayed me recently, I wondered if my success had an expiration date. That was the cruelest part. They never had to lie outright. They only had to guide me toward the conclusion they wanted. By the time I agreed to sign the papers, I felt relieved. Relieved to stop fighting. Relieved to stop doubting myself. Relieved to let go. I did not yet understand that relief was exactly what they were counting on. Because while I believed my body was failing me, someone very close to me was making sure it did. And smiling while he did it. The waitress led me down a narrow hallway behind the dining room. My legs felt weak, but my mind was strangely alert. Fear has a way of sharpening certain senses even when others fail. She stopped in front of a small storage room and opened the door just enough for us to slip inside. Boxes of napkins were stacked against the walls. Cleaning supplies lined the floor. In the corner, a small monitor glowed faintly. She shut the door and locked it. I remember thinking how absurd it was. A woman who owned a company worth millions standing in a storage room, heart racing, because a stranger had asked her not to faint. My phone lay on the table beneath the monitor, but she did not hand it to me. Instead, she turned the screen toward me. "This is from 20 minutes ago," she said quietly. "From the camera above your table." The image was grainy, black and white. I saw myself on the screen, rising from my chair, pushing it back slightly as I excused myself. I watched myself walk out of the frame. Jason and Melissa remained seated. The moment I disappeared, Jason changed. The gentle posture vanished. The concerned tilt of his head disappeared. He leaned back, glanced around quickly, and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. My breath caught. He pulled out a small clear vial. Not a prescription bottle, not anything a doctor would give. A laboratory ampule. I watched as he uncapped it with practiced ease. Melissa shifted closer, her body blocking the view from the servers passing nearby. She laughed at something he said. They looked relaxed, comfortable. Jason tilted my wine glass. The clear liquid vanished into the red wine. I grabbed the edge of the table beside me to keep from collapsing. My own son had just poisoned my drink. But the footage continued. Jason leaned forward, his shoulders hunching. He began to shake slightly, exaggerating the movement, mimicking my unsteady hands, my dizziness. His face twisted into a caricature of weakness. Melissa threw her head back and laughed, not a polite laugh, not nervous laughter. Mockery. Pure enjoyment. I felt something break inside me. "Turn the sound on," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. The waitress hesitated, then clicked the control. The hum of the restaurant filled the room. "She thinks it is old age," Jason said on the recording, his voice calm and amused. "The poor woman. A couple more doses and she will forget what anything smells like." Melissa leaned closer. "What if she hesitates again?" Jason smiled. "She will not. Where would she go? She is terrified of losing her gift, and the best part is she does not even realize she is losing the company too. They laughed together. In that moment my knees gave out. I sank to the floor not because I was weak, but because the truth was heavier than my body could carry. The woman who had raised him was gone. In her place stood someone he saw as an obstacle. And he was removing me one dose at a time. I do not remember how long I stayed on the floor of that storage room. Time lost its shape. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the weight of what I had just learned. Betrayal does not arrive loudly. It settles into the chest like a stone and slowly steals the air. The waitress knelt beside me, unsure whether to touch me. She asked if I needed water or an ambulance. Her voice trembled, but there was courage in her eyes. I shook my head. Because somewhere beneath the grief, something else was forming. Clarity. My body was not failing me. My mind was not slipping. I was being poisoned. Methodically, intentionally. The dizziness, the congestion, the loss of smell, it all aligned perfectly now. The timing, the pressure, the sudden urgency to sign everything over. This was not nature, this was planning. That realization changed everything. Grief still hurt, but it no longer controlled me. Anger did not consume me either. What took its place was something far more dangerous. Focus. I stood up slowly. My legs were steady again. My hands no longer shook. I thanked the waitress. I gave her cash, not as payment but as gratitude. I asked her to stay silent, to tell anyone who asked that I had simply forgotten my phone. She agreed without hesitation. When I stepped outside, the night air felt different. I still could not smell it, but I understood why now, and that meant it could be reversed. I did not go home as a defeated woman. I went home as a strategist. I went straight to my private lab, the one place Jason avoided. I tested the residue from my wine, from the fabric of my scarf. The results were unmistakable. A synthetic receptor blocker, temporary but effective. Whoever chose it assumed I would give up before I figured it out. They were wrong. I looked at the charts, the numbers, the proof glowing on the screen. And for the first time since my symptoms began, I smiled. They wanted a weak old woman who would surrender quietly. I would give them exactly that performance. And while they applauded, I would take everything back. The next morning, I called Jason. I let my voice shake. I breathed unevenly. I allowed panic to slip into every pause. Jason, I said, I think it is worse. I cannot smell anything at all. Not coffee, not soap, nothing. There was a brief silence on the line. Not concern, calculation. Then his voice softened, just as I expected. Mom, it is all right. We knew this might happen. You have been pushing yourself too hard for too long. I swallowed, forcing a small sob. I cannot live like this. I do not want to wait until next week. Bring the papers today. I will sign everything. I just want it to be over. Relief slipped into his tone before he could hide it. Of course, Mom. Melissa and I will come after lunch. Get some rest. We will take care of everything. When the call ended, my hands were steady. Acceleration was the first move. I removed his time to think. People make mistakes when they believe they have already won. I did not eat anything in the house that day. Instead, I threw out every open container, every supplement Jason had ever given me. In the back of a cabinet, I found them. Small clear vials identical to the one I saw on the screen. The same substance, the same label. I documented everything. Then I contacted the only man I trusted completely, Henry Cole. He had supplied rare raw materials to my company for decades. He knew my inventory better than anyone alive. That night, under cover of darkness, his trucks arrived. Every barrel of aged oil, every sealed essence, every irreplaceable formula was quietly moved to a secure location, known only to us. What remained in the warehouse was harmless liquid, carefully tinted and sealed, indistinguishable to anyone who did not truly understand scent. By the time Jason and Melissa arrived at my house that afternoon, I was wrapped in a shawl, hunched slightly in my chair, playing the role they expected. I dropped a pen. I confused words. I apologized too much. They exchanged satisfied glances. They thought they were watching the end of me. In reality, they were standing on a stage. And the final act had already been written. The board meeting took place on Friday morning. Jason insisted on driving me himself. He kept glancing at me from the corner of his eye, checking for signs of confusion, weakness, collapse. I gave him what he wanted: slow movements, a distant gaze, silence. The conference room was already full when we arrived. Long polished table, leather chairs, men in gray suits who smelled of money and impatience. Representatives from Blackridge Industrial Group sat on one side, their expressions cool and detached. To them, I was not a person, I was a signature. Jason rushed ahead of me, eager to control the room. He pulled out the documents, laid them neatly in front of my chair, and placed a pen in my hand. "Just sign here, Mom," he whispered. "Then we can all relax?" I looked down at the papers but did not move. "Before I sign," I said slowly, "there is something I must do." Jason stiffened. The executives exchanged annoyed glances. "This will only take a moment," I continued. "It is a tradition in my company, one my father followed, and his father before him." I reached down and lifted a small case onto the table. Inside were scent blotters and 2 identical crystal decanters filled with amber-colored liquid. "We call it a founder's test," I said. "Before any transfer of ownership, the successor must identify the core notes of the house." Jason's face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Mom, stop this!" One of the executives laughed, smelling perfume. "That is what we are delaying millions for?" "You are purchasing a fragrance house," I replied calmly. "If you cannot identify scent, you are buying blind." Reluctantly, they agreed. I handed a blotter dipped in the liquid to Jason first. He hesitated, then inhaled. No reaction. Not a flicker of recognition. I handed another to the lead executive. He sniffed confidently, then frowned. "Floral," he said, "slightly sweet." Jason nodded quickly. "Yes, Rose. Maybe sandalwood." I let the silence stretch. "Interesting," I said softly. I straightened in my chair. The frailty left my posture. My voice sharpened. "Gentlemen, what you have just described is industrial solvent mixed with a synthetic receptor blocker and a cheap air freshener. Not perfume, not oil, not art." The room froze. Jason shot to his feet. "She is confused. She has been ill. Do not listen to her." I pressed a button on the remote in my hand. Jason's own voice filled the room. "She thinks it is old age. A couple more doses and she will forget what anything smells like." Melissa's laughter followed. The executives went pale. "This meeting is over," one of them said, standing abruptly. "No," I replied. "This is the beginning. The oils you plan to collect tonight are gone, removed legally, secured permanently. What remains in the warehouses is colored water. You came to buy my legacy. Instead, you exposed a crime." Jason stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. In that moment, the trap closed. And there was no way out. Chaos followed, but it was no longer mine to control. The executives from Blackridge stood up at once, speaking over each other, denying responsibility, distancing themselves from Jason, as if he were suddenly contagious. Men who had entered the room confident and untouchable now avoided my eyes. Jason turned to me, panic flooding his face. "Mom, please," he said. "This has gone too far. You do not understand what you are doing." I understood perfectly. Before anyone could say more, the doors opened. Police officers entered the conference room, followed by a detective who already had a file in his hands. The evidence had been submitted the night before: the footage, the lab results, the vials found in Jason's possession. Jason was arrested where he stood. He did not look like a mastermind then. He looked small, cornered, furious in the way only someone caught in their own cruelty can be. Melissa never spoke to me again. She left the building without a word and filed for divorce within weeks. Blackridge Industrial Group withdrew overnight. Their stock collapsed as investigations began. They called it a misunderstanding. The courts called it complicity. I did not attend my son's sentencing. Some doors once closed do not need to be reopened. Justice did not bring peace, but it brought truth, and that was enough to breathe again. I returned to the lab the following Monday. The silence there was different from before. It was no longer oppressive. It was clean, honest. I ran my fingers over glassware, over old notebooks filled with handwriting only I could still recognize. That was where Lily found me. She no longer wore a server's uniform. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure whether she belonged there. I saw the same thing in her eyes that I once saw in myself. Curiosity. Integrity. I offered her an apprenticeship. Not out of gratitude, but because she had done something rare. She chose truth when silence was easier. She trusted her instincts when fear told her not to. Legacy, I learned, is not about blood. It is about values. It is about who you trust to carry what matters when you no longer can. Together we rebuilt slowly, carefully, with respect for what had been saved. For the first time in years, I created without pressure. Without manipulation. Without fear. People often ask me if I regret what I did. If I regret exposing my own son. If a mother's love should have been stronger than justice. Here is the truth. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Forgiveness without accountability becomes betrayal of the self. What Jason did was not a mistake. It was a choice repeated again and again, with planning and pleasure. I did not ruin his life. He did. What I saved was my name, my work, and my right to finish my life with clarity. Now I ask you, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have protected your child at the cost of your soul? Or would you have chosen truth even if it broke your heart? Tell me in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes revenge is not about destruction. Sometimes it is about survival.